All right, so I'm with Ryan Stout, a very funny fellow. He's been on, as I recall, Conan show and Chelsea Lately in the same night, right? I always like pointing that out. And I know it was like a coincidence of timing, as
Right.
you humbly noted, but it was pretty amazing to have you on a show, either podcast or live, right as that was about to happen.
Yeah.
And because I don't think there's ever been anybody who's been like on two shows in one night like that, really. But
Yeah, it
um,
is it is a strange anomaly. Like I did a Chelsea lately episode that was it was kind of an evergreen episode, so it
okay,
was just kind of not exactly topical but somewhat topical, and then it just so happened that they chose it to air on the same night that I was doing Conan. So I was competing with myself necessarily.
yeah, that's wild. Yeah. So, anyways, well, what we're going to be talking about is Ryan was a guest on some of our shows as podcasts, but also first and foremost, what I want to get out of this interview is he headlined he headlined one of my shows that called the Pajama Party shows that we did live at the Gaylord Apartments lobby. And we already described that in some other interviews in detail. But the incident that I think is just amazing that I want to spotlight in this documentary is that Ryan has a very classy image, wears a suit, very looks like super conservative on stage, and not in the political sense, just you look very buttoned down is what I'm saying. And then that night you gave a bunch of euphemisms for anal sex, and because we had this rule that we had to abide by, which was absurd. The building manager said nobody could swear at all because there was a kid in the building, like
Mm.
one kid, and he was like 12. Like that kid isn't swearing more than any of us would have anyway. And anyway, so everybody had to watch what they're saying always. And we always had to warn people. And so you were dancing around the subject, saying terms like Hershey Highway. Maybe you can regale us with more of those in a second. But what I'll never forget is that we had a doorman named Joe who was older, and he talks with a southern accent, and he always seemed like sort of flamboyant, but I could never tell because he's very conservative. But there was a lot of mannerisms that I really always wondered: is this guy gay? Not that I care normally, but in the context of what happened here, um, he there was an incident where Adam Grotman, my co-host, asked me to go up to Joe after the show and tell him that he owed an apology to Adam and his then fiance, now wife. And the reason why is that Robin had brought a little dog to the building, and she had very carefully cradled it. And we allowed dogs in the building. I don't know why he had an issue with it, but he was like, "That dog's gotta go," and he kept telling her it's gotta go. And she's like, "No, I just drove from Burbank. I can't do that." And he's like, "Well, I'm not going to clean it up if it shits on the floor. Get the fucking dog out of here." And so I go to him after the show, after you do your set with those terms and stuff, and I said, Joe, I really hate to do this, but apparently you were very rude to Adam and Adam's fiance, and they want an apology. And Joe, and I said to him, he goes, "For what?" I go, "Because you used the F word on her. I mean, you said that her fucking dog has to go." And he was like, so he just stares at me, and he looks just dead evil stare. And he goes, "Ah, really? You want to talk about that to the manager? Well, what about your headliner talking about anal sex?" And so we both looked, and I just like froze. And I look at him, he's looking at me, and it was like the proverbial Mexican standoff. And I finally just go, "Okay, have a good night, Joe." And so he won. But I mean, do you recall it all, that set? And go ahead and give us some of the terms that you used. And were you aware that there was such a weird response from this guy?
Um, so first and foremost, I think we have to go back to what was kind of happening with me in comedy at that time, which was
Okay.
I was touring around the country doing clubs, doing sets. Um, I was actually getting around the world doing sets everywhere,
Wow.
and my career was going well. And artistically, I had a very straightforward kind of goal, which was to push the line as far as I possibly could without using any profanity. So
Oh,
while I
yeah.
wouldn't swear at all, I was still getting on stage talking about third world kids and abortion and sexual assault and whatever else. And what was really fascinating to me is the number of people who would approach me after my show, after doing that for an hour, and they would be like, you know what I liked about your show? It was clean. And so it was like, I would look at these people and I would just smile and I'd say, well, thank you very much. But in my head, I would go, you people are crazy. It is absolutely bananas to label something clean or dirty based on no swearing. So when I showed up to the Gaylord to do your show and the rule was there's no swearing, I was like, okay, well, here we go. I'm just going to do the same act that I always do because those are the rules, no swearing. And so I had this one specific bit about it was I had heard from my dad, like in the 1960s, there was a euphemism for anal sex that was going down the dirt road. And I related that to when I was growing up, um, it was going up the Hershey Highway. And so I related that to the crowd, like, see, so many people were doing it. The road actually got paved and turned into an express lane. Like, that's how popular the activity was. And then what happened next? A fudge packing factory moved in. And what does that mean? Jobs, education, growth. And before you know it, you've got people going to Browntown. And so the bit just grows and grows and grows, but it's all of these euphemisms. And I mean, the final punchline of the entire joke is the word infrastructure. Now, anybody who thinks that's a dirty joke, like, all of the punchlines are about urban planning. And I even say in the joke, that is the cleanest joke about anal sex you'll ever hear in your lives. And then, oddly enough, it's on my first album, which is right there, by the way.
Wow,
The
you're a pro.
the album is touche, and the bit is euphemisms. And strangely enough, when the album came out, all of the reviews that the album got, including from people who loved it and people who hated it, all of the reviews went, but that euphemisms joke was really, really good. So it's fascinating to me that, like, you've got this whole relationship and this whole story related to this joke that is, for all intents and purposes, a really great joke. And in the joke, it's like laid out like, this is a clean joke. We're not doing anything dirty. Like, I'm not describing penetration in any way. Like, there's no physical activity happening in the joke. And so the idea that he would use that against you as like blackmail almost is absurd. But of course, you would have no way to defend yourself because you didn't have a recording of the joke.
Yeah, that was wild. Yeah, so but were you, I forget, did I tell you this had happened before, or is this the first time you're hearing about this?
I seem to remember you mentioning that to me, I think that night, but it was kind of hazy.
Okay.
But that was another thing that would kind of happen to me too, that typically people who really liked my stand-up would describe it as very smart. And then people who disliked my stand-up would describe it as dirty and offensive. And the people who liked me and describe it as smart couldn't understand what was dirty or offensive about it. And the people who thought it was dirty and offensive couldn't begin to imagine why it was smart comedy. So it was a really nice divide for me to say, okay, you're my fans, you come with me, and you people who hate me, you can go away. And so the doorman at the Gaylord, who clearly thought I was doing some dirty anal sex thing, he's not a fan, and I don't need him to be, and I don't want him to be.
Yeah. Wow. So okay, so then let's talk about the podcast. You recalled that you were a guest on our shows in the downtown era. We were in Hollywood also. Well, like, first
I did Hollywood.
we had a show.
I
Well,
did
first
Hollywood, I did downtown, and then I did something on Olympic, I think.
an Olympic.
Yeah.
I don't remember. I mean, I lived on Wilshire at the Gaylord. I hosted shows for 3 years at the Gaylord, but you would have known that was the Gaylord because you did the pajama party there.
Right,
But
right.
anyway, I don't think there was Olympic. I'm not sure.
Well, it
But
was a show that you were producing, but you weren't hosting. I remember because you weren't there.
oh, that's
You had
weird.
set me up with it, but
It was a live show or a podcast?
it was a podcast.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
strange. I don't know. Okay, sorry about that.
no,
Maybe
it's fine.
maybe I just knew somebody who needed a guest or something. I don't know. But anyways, no. So we did Grand Theft Audio, renting out other people's facilities for like 3 or 4 years, and then we started Radio Titans in downtown in Hollywood first, and then in downtown LA, and in Hollywood. If you said you went to that location as well, right?
Hmm.
Uh, yeah. Any thoughts about the building? We're collecting people's horror stories. Like I didn't remember that there were apparently bums and drug addicts passed out asleep on the inside stairs. Sometimes people had to step over like passed out junkies, and there was, just to refresh your memory in case any of this helps spark a thought. The basement had a literal gang running drugs out of it. The
Mm.
third floor, which is the floor above us, had illegal gambling on the weekends and
This
got
is this
busted
is
by
the
the cops for
Hollywood
stealing.
location, right?
Yes. Oh yeah, totally.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I do
Yeah.
remember like showing up to the podcast and then having to call you so that you could like unlock some sort of door and we could get in, and then you lock the door immediately behind us.
Yes.
And you were like, call me as soon as you get here, and then I'll immediately come down and get you. So I remember that was the first time I had ever done anything with you, Carl. And I'm immediately like looking around. We're in a seedy neighborhood. There's literally like boarded up windows, and doors need to be locked and unlocked, and we need to move quickly. And I was like, what? What is this? I'm probably wearing a suit and tie at the time because I have to go do a show that night. And I'm like, this is not, I can't imagine this is legitimate. I don't know, but podcasting was new at the time, and it was just starting off, and you were like, I guess I'm going to go into this decrepit building and do a podcast. I don't know.
Wow. Um, and to think that we thought, oh, it's the glamour of Hollywood, and we would tell people, come down to Hollywood, and and people were intrigued because podcasting was new, and it was either they didn't know what it was, or it was done only in apartments, which is where it wound up largely going eventually anyway. But people were always intrigued by, oh, an office, and so so then after that hellhole ended, um, we took like 6 months off, and we got lucky. It was quite miraculous. We wound up in a completely different environment, on in the Macy's Plaza, one of the most distinctive locations in downtown LA. It
Yeah.
was like our personal 30 Rock, and we were on the 11th floor, skyline view, and 24/7 access. I don't know how we bribed the guards for that, but and we had the right to do whatever we wanted at night, make all the noise we wanted. So we had bands come through recording and whatever. But you were there at that, and that was a classier environment, but there was still some oddness to it. So any memories of that, good or bad?
So I think it was really kind of jarring for me the first time that I showed up to the Macy's Plaza, because after the first experience being in the rundown seedy Hollywood, and then now I have to like sign in with a security guard, and they have to like let me into the elevator to go up to a certain floor. And I'm like, what? There must be a lot of money in podcasting or something. I don't know how they made the leap from being in this boarded up crack house to now we're in a professional setting where I think you had like a beautiful like office setup with like all the gear and stuff like that. And then there was a waiting room with like a refrigerator. You had a full kitchen. And I was like, how did they possibly make that jump? And it was so baffling to me, but I was like, all right, well, I can't wait to do it again, because clearly these guys know what they're doing. And boy, was I wrong. No, you guys were always great. You guys always came through. So it was nice.
Oh, thank
Then I
you.
think
Yeah, I mean,
then
yeah.
you guys validated my parking, and I was like, Jesus, all right, we really are doing well here.
Yeah. That was a pretty amazing setup. I mean, because we paid for, it was included in the deal that we would have one parking space reserved for our guests, and but people just showed up and parked wherever at the Macy's lot, and we were allowed to just validate like crazy. But yeah, that was quite an experience, and we got lucky. Just in case this sparks a funny retort or whatever, what actually happened was um, that I went looking all over downtown for office space, and the ironic thing was that the Hollywood, before we got the Hollywood space, I had actually walked by the block, which is what they called it, actually the block. I walked by their lobby and I saw the guards and a big fancy sign listing all the amenities, and I thought, oh, this place, that's going to be way too expensive. And so we avoided it and wound up in the hellhole we were in. And so then later on, I didn't even remember that I had walked by the place until I got there to look at what became the acceptance tour of it, and I just was calling different management companies downtown, and I almost didn't even go there. I was exhausted because I was trying one place after another. It just wasn't the right fit, and the woman begged me, the manager, like, would you please come down here? You made an appointment and we really need to sell these spaces. And I was like, all right. And I go there, and she showed me like a small one room. It was on the opposite side of the floor, and it looked out, it had a view, but it was largely of a couple buildings. And I was supposed to sign off on that because it was all I could afford, right? And she goes, "Oh, don't worry, you can, as you grow, you can get better space." And I'm like, okay. And so then, like when we're actually supposed to move in and sign the papers, that day she calls me and says, "Yeah, we won't be able to give you the space that you wanted, Mr. Kozlowski." And I'm like, "This is an outrage!" And I was like, all pissed off and yelling at her, and so she's like, "Oh, wait, we'll work out something." And so I called Jake Bowman up. My original partner was a Jake Belcher in Hollywood, and then there was a Jake Bowman for downtown. And so I called Bowman up, and I'm like, "I can't freaking believe this, blah blah blah." And so he's like, "I'm gonna go down there and I'll deal with it." And I'm like, "Okay." And so I'm at the newspaper, pissed off, but doing my work. I get a phone call a couple hours later. Is it Carl? Make whatever excuse you can and get out of the office and come downtown now. And I'm like, "What?" He goes, "Get here by 5." It was like 3:30. I'm in Pasadena, and so I make an excuse, like, I suddenly was dying, and I just run out of the office, get on the train, and I get down there, and he says, "Well, we found a different side of the building and different suite. I think you'll like it, but they need you to approve." And he opens the door, and there's like this 6-room suite with a waiting area, and the spectacular view, beautiful, all the way to the mountains, and just nuts. And I go, "How much is this? There's no way we can afford this." And they were like, "Oh, they're giving it to us for the price of the other room for 6 months." And I
Wow.
never understood why there was a 6-month time limit, but they gave us 6 rooms, and it was the most bizarre setup because we had a giant studio in the best room. We set up a big studio where we could even have like guitars and drums and stuff. And then, like, the next room over, Jake Bowman actually moved into secretly. So he lived around the clock there, bathing at the gym in the bottom of Macy's Plaza. And then, like, 2 other guys took over other rooms, one of whom I never figured out what his purpose was with Titans, but he lived in the next room over from Jake and just hung out all the time. And it was just like the most bizarre setup, but it was incredible. So I don't know. I mean, we pulled that off for like 800 a month. It was crazy.
Yeah, I mean that's spectacular. And what happened at the end of the 6 months? You guys just they
Okay, so
wouldn't
that
renew?
was that. No, what was weird, at the end of the 6 months, they started like phasing us out room by room, and so other people were being rented rooms within the 6-room area because it was like one big door opened into 6 rooms inside behind the door, and they were renting to one and to another. Like one was my office, and it got taken away, and then but then people would complain that they thought there were pot smells on after the weekends, and so they would leave the rooms. So they kept giving us back the rooms after, and because they could never quite prove that we did anything.
Uh-huh.
We said, oh no, we just do incense, and that probably was actually the truth, because everybody would smoke in the alley outside, not indoors.
Sure.
And I never smoked at all. That was the weird part. That's one of my lines I'm gonna have to say in this movie is that I'm the only person not getting lucky or high, and I ran the place.
Mhm.
But it was like, um, uh, yeah, they took it away eventually, and then she said, "Well, we have to change it altogether, but I'm going to give you my office." And so when she kicked us out of the whole 6 rooms, she gave us the best single office in the entire complex, hers. I mean, I never understood it, and this woman hated us too because there were always complaints about pot smells or incense, whatever it actually was, and sometimes people came in on the weekend to work, and when it was in our deal we could make all the racket we wanted, but they were still not happy about it. And we were just the biggest headache on the planet for her, but she gave us this sweet office after that. So we had a good situation the whole time.
Yeah, that
It
was
was just,
great. And then
yeah.
were you guys there in her place for another 6 months?
um we left, it all fell apart. Okay, we got there end of January 2014, and I pulled the plug very abruptly October of 2015, because what drove us out, and it's good that we're talking about this because I forgot to make note of this. I need to make sure I make this part of the film story. Is that we were using a service called Libsyn to distribute our podcasts, because Jake Bowman, my partner, was sold at some podcast conference that, oh, this is the cutting edge thing that they'll distribute us like crazy. This will make us blow up. And it did start to make our numbers vastly increase. But the problem was this shitty company, they had a policy, and maybe this makes sense, I don't know, but when you start with them and you have very few listeners, we were paying like 100 something a month at first, but then they boomed our audience up to like, I mean, nowadays this is nothing for a hit show, but we went from like 5,000 to 50,000 in like 3 months, as far as like average a week or whatever.
Hmm.
And so the bandwidth that they charged us for was up to $800, and our rent was about $800. And we always, I was such a bad businessman. It was all about the creativity for us, and we just always guess estimated how many shows we had to sell to keep paying the rent, and that was that. We were making like 1,300 a month and paying 800.
Wow.
And so then all of a sudden this bill comes out of nowhere, and they said, you got to pay this in 2 days, or you lose all your bandwidth storage and everything. And I had no way to pay it that abruptly, and so I was like, we got to go, and I shut it all down, and wound up doing it out of my apartment for 3 years at the Gaylord.
Hmm.
And that was kind of fun too, but it was a different vibe. I mean, definitely, but people still like coming in the lobby of the Gaylord. But then the actual apartment, I don't know if you actually were in there or not. I was in a studio. And so it's like I had a studio and a studio apartment. And it's amazing how many women are making funny comments in this documentary about the fact that they never told me they were creeped out at the time, but they were all like, the first time they walked in, they were like, why is there a bed 10 feet from the recording table? And so, but I had this reputation of totally not being a creep. And so it was like this weird thing where everybody's like, well, that's weird, but what's Carl? And so it was like it was kind of a funny situation in that way. But we did it for 3 years, and I had some pretty big things happen. Like Kevin Costner showed up once. That was my biggest get ever, and so my building was always freaking out. Like, uh, you know, wait, why was this actor or that actor in the lobby? And why are they asking for Carl? And why are they coming and going? And because the thing was, we weren't allowed to have businesses in there. and so it was all top secret.
Oh, wow.
I mean, you opened my door and it was like, big table, all sorts of mics and sound equipment and shit was over half the apartment. But I mean, the thing was, I made sure the landlord like never had a reason to come bother me or whatever. I would always run to the office if he wanted to see me rather than let him come to me. And so I hid that for like 3 years. And then eventually what happened there was I just got burned down on people coming over to my apartment. My Saturdays were completely shot to hell because I'd have like 5 shows every Saturday for 3 years, and I was making money, but it was like just nerve wracking. I never had any downtime, you know what I mean? So I just said, oh, screw it. So,
Well, and at the time too, it was podcasting was still kind of new. So
yeah,
if your landlord did peek in and see all this audio equipment, you could just be like, "Oh yeah, I do podcasts," and they'd be like, "What is that? Some kind of hobby? All right, you do your thing, Carl. We don't care." Like
I think that
they wouldn't have any idea.
that basically because the maintenance men came in sometimes and they would be like, whoa. And so and I told them it was just a hobby. So I think it kind of went that way anyway. But I'm just saying I really did like run out of the room if I got an email like, oh, we need to see you about something, Carl. And I would hightail it down to the office rather than give him any chance to come up to me. And yeah, it was pretty funny. And then also, um, I shot a sitcom pilot. I don't know if you're aware of that, but it was trying to be like a Curb Your Enthusiasm about me as a entertainment reporter and podcaster and stand up, and how I always screw things up by falling asleep at the wrong time or saying the wrong thing because I'm very politically incorrect. And anyways, we shot that. We shot it 3 different times with 3 different scripts in 3 different years before I finally was happy with it. And every time I had some pretty good guest stars like Alonzo Bowden or Stephen Tobolowsky was in all 3 versions. He's a pretty big character actor. You'd know him if you don't know the name. You would know him the second you see him. But and people were always like, "Why are those cameras going into his apartment?" And they had a real tough rule that you couldn't film in the Gaylord without paying like it was literally like $20,000 a day because like big TV shows would come and film in the lobby because it was so swank. Like Scandal shot there a lot because they made it the lobby of Kerry Washington's fictional apartment building. Excuse me, and so I had to do this whole thing guerrilla 3 different times in 3 years, like sneaking in camera crews and like actors and everything into my tiny studio apartment. There'd be like 20 people turning it into a hot box of sweat as we're setting up lights and everything. It was pretty amazing.
Wow. Yeah.
So, yeah. Anyways, anything else you'd care to say about the experience or any memories of, do you think we stood out in any way aside from the location? Um, yeah.
I mean, I just remember you guys at the time were getting these numbers that nobody had ever really heard of. Just having the idea that you would email me and say, "Hey, I've got the show, 50,000 people listen to it." I'm like, "Really?" Because that's 10% of like a late night talk show on cable. They're only getting 500,000 people, and I can just go down the street and talk into the microphone and hang out for an hour, and we've got this huge audience. And podcasting was so new that everyone was baffled that your audience was so huge.
Oh,
And
that was kind of an exaggeration, to be honest. I
that's
mean,
fine.
no, what it was we were hitting 50,000 a month with all our shows put together. But the thing was, that in order to convince big people to show up, we just started saying, "Yeah, we got 50,000 listeners,"
Yeah,
and
everybody does that. That's fine.
But still, the way I look at it was that even if some shows had 500 or 1,000 listeners at a time, if you think about it, you're getting to still be funny in front of an audience that's bigger than the Comedy Store or the Laugh Factory or the Improv.
Yeah.
So it was still like a cool scenario in a way. And now, as we're going through all our archives, we're finding like there were so many stars that came through, and so many people that became stars. Like Melissa Villaseñor was on our stuff like all the time, a couple of years before SNL, you know. And so the thing is, that we're hoping, we're redoing the whole website over the next couple months. And we're going to put everything that's any good, like thousands of hours of shows up, and properly archive it and everything, and figure out how to market it, because people are saying, this is really something that is pretty crazy, because a lot of people haven't heard it, but they'll be intrigued to hear, all these famous people doing stuff. And our shows were rarely topical; they were usually like absurd discussions of things, and so it holds up. We're very lucky that it was very few things were, oh, that have to be funny only in July 2015 or whatever. You know what I mean? So
Yeah, I always felt like it was very easy to just come in and hang out and have a good time. And I always appreciated that I would just get an email from you inviting me to do the show. And it was over the course of like years. I would just get a random email being like, "Hey, Ryan, you haven't done the show in a while. Come on by." And I always liked just being, I don't know, invited and included. And I was like, of course I'm going to go. Feels great. It was always very friendly, and it was just a good hang.
thank you, man. I appreciate it. I think that's, hang on, I'm going to pause it.